Welcome to Saturday Morning Classics. We are currently reading Manitou Blood by Graham Masterton. This week we are continuing with the rest of Chapter 18, and Harry Erskine has just discovered that Vasily Loop, the vampire gatherer, is actually being possessed by Miss Quomacus. So sit back, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy the story. In the mirror, the sky grew blacker and blacker until I found myself staring at nothing but my own reflection. I turned around and Jenica was standing close to me with about 6 different expressions on her face. "Who was that?" she asked. "Do you know him?" Gil came out of the kitchen and laid his baseball bat down on the hallway table. "They've gone," he said. He had wound a tea towel around his hand, but it was already soaked with blood. Jenica said, "Here, let me see that." "It's not too bad. At least it's clean." He looked back into the kitchen as if he couldn't believe what he had witnessed. You should have seen them hightailing it out that window, like roaches when you switch on the light. And they climbed right down the wall, like head first, man. How do you climb down a wall head first? "Count Dracula did it, in the original novel," I told him. Jenica said, "They defy gravity, the Strigoi, because they are no longer alive." I lifted up the decorated bone and looked at it again. I had no idea what its origins were, or what the symbols on it might have meant, but it definitely contained some extraordinary power, and not Romanian-type power either. "I could sure use a drink," said Gil. "How about opening another bottle of death breath?" "There is one thing I must do before that," said Jenica. She picked up Gil's baseball bat, went up to the mirror, and hit it as hard as she could. Her first blow only starred it, but then she swung the bat again, and this time the glass dropped onto the floor in a sparkling heap, and there was nothing left in the frame but a plain wooden backing. "I think I owe Frank an apology," she said, "and you too, Harry, for doubting you." "Little bit late for Frank, I'm afraid." She went into the living room and sat down. Jenica said, "I think my father would understand if I open his palinka." "Excuse me?" She held up a clear glass bottle. "Plum brandy from Transylvania, very strong." She poured us each a large measure, and we took a swallow without making a toast. Gil gasped for breath. "You could dissolve diamonds in this." "My father says that every person who drinks palinka becomes in their heart a Romanian, whatever their passport says." I took another swallow. I don't know what it was doing for my nationality, but it was certainly doing my cojones good. I reckoned that after half a bottle of palinka, I could probably fight a whole legion of Strigoi, and any Svarkalaki you cared to bring on. "So what exactly happened out there?" said Gil. "I don't understand why those Strigoi suddenly turned tail." "I am not so sure either," said Jenica. "I spoke the ritual for disenchanting the vampire gatherer, and at first I thought that it had not worked. Yet suddenly he turned around and returned to the mirror world, and when he did that, all of the Strigoi left too." All the time she was looking at me, because she wanted to know who that figure in the war bonnet was, and she knew that I knew. "That creature," I said, "that shadow thing that looks like the spirit of Vasily Loop. And it is the spirit of Vasily Loop, mostly. But he's like somebody who gets possessed by a demon, you know, like Regan in The Exorcist. Outwardly, you know, they seem to be the same person. Their appearance is the same, but they're not in control of their own personality. It's the demon who's taken charge of everything they say and everything they do." "So what are you telling us?" said Gil. "That Vasily Loop's spirit is possessed by another spirit? How does that work?" "Spirits are just the same as living people. Some of them are leaders, and some of them are followers." Vasily Loop must be a pretty dominant character, though, if he was able to rouse up all of these vampires. And he not only roused them up, he got them to spread themselves all over the city in less than 48 hours. Think about it. A couple of hundred vampires have managed to do in 2 days what even Al-Qaeda could never have done, even with a nuclear bomb. They've killed thousands of people, and they've recruited thousands more to do the same. So the killing is spreading, like, exponentially. Sure, I said, but Vasily Loop didn't start this epidemic himself. Somebody had to rouse him, didn't they? That's why I think that he's been possessed by some spirit that's even more powerful than he is. You know who this spirit is, don't you? Said Jenica. It was that man with the headdress on, the one you saw in the mirror. You actually know who that was? Said Gil. I nodded. He's a Native American wonder worker called Misquamacus. He was the greatest medicine man of his time, or any other time, for that matter. I've had a couple of run-ins with him before. I thought I managed to destroy him. Well, I thought I managed to destroy him 4 times over. 3 times he came back, but the last time I thought was for keeps. A Native American wonder worker? Said Gil haltingly. And how exactly did you come to get yourself involved with a Native American wonder worker? I swallowed another mouthful of palinka. It was partially by accident, but mostly through the fortune-telling. I don't have any kind of natural ability for it, not like Amelia, but even the dumbest person in the world has some psychic sensitivity, even though I never really believed in it. I guess I dealt out so many tarot cards and read so many tea leaves, I started to make contact with the spirit world. And this Misquamacus, what's his beef? His beef is that he doesn't like America occupied by white people, or any other kind of people for that matter, only Indians. He tried to call down his ancient gods to get rid of us, but that didn't work, so he tried to demolish all of our buildings, but that didn't work. So this time it looks as if he's using one of our own superstitions to get rid of us. It's like spiritual karate. Use your enemy's own strength against him. Like Al-Qaeda used our own airplanes. Only this is going to be 1,000,000 times worse. But he went back into the mirror, said Jenica. He was about to seize me, but then he turned away. If he is a Native American and not Romanian, why could I send him back with a ritual that was meant for Svarkolaki? Well, I guess your ritual must have weakened his host, I suggested, but I'm pretty sure that this bone had a lot to do with it. I waved it at him, and all of these words came out of my mouth, and it wasn't even me speaking. And it buzzed, you know? I felt like Luke Skywalker with a lightsaber. Gil took the bone and waved it from side to side. Maybe it's some kind of magic wand. Of a kind, yes, it probably is. My guess is that Misquamacus used it to wake up Vasily Loop, and that he left it in his casket for a reason. If you are right, said Jenica, perhaps we can do to this wonder worker what he is trying to do to us, and use his own weapon against him. I took the bone back. First of all, I think we need to find out exactly what it is and how to use it. And how do you suggest we do that? We ask the expert, my spirit guide. Singing Rock. Gil stared at me. You're serious, aren't you? I lit 3 of Jenica's spicy candles and arranged Singing Rock's bracelet around the biggest of them. We had finished almost the whole bottle of palinka between us, and although Jenica had opened a tin of Romanian tea cookies, I was feeling slightly unsteady, to say the least, like crossing over to Staten Island on a choppy day. While I was preparing the table, Gil went around the Dragomir apartment and broke every mirror he could find, although he hesitated when he came to the gilt-framed antiques. Jenica took the baseball bat away from him and smashed them herself. Better that my father comes home to find a few broken mirrors rather than a dead daughter. That's the spirit, I told her. How about one more shot of Palinka to give us some Romanian courage? I'll grant you one thing, Harry, said Gil. You can sure put it away. I've had a disappointing life, Gil. That's why. You know what your trouble is, buddy? You expect too much. Me? I've never expected nothing, so everything that's ever come my way, it's like a bonus, you know? Gil, I've never expected nothing either, but that's precisely what I got. Nothing. We sat around the table. I thought that we were all looking exhausted. All of the adrenaline that had charged us up while we were fighting the Strigoi had drained away now, and none of us had slept well. But I needed to talk to Singing Rock, if only to confirm that it was Miss Quamacus who was wreaking so much havoc in New York City, and to tell me if this decorated bone was really as powerful a weapon as I thought it was. I clasped my hands together and said, Singing Rock, I know that I've been making a whole lot of demands on you lately, but I really need some advice. It looks like it was Miss Quamacus who brought all of these vampires back to life, and if that's the case, we're in much more serious trouble here than I first imagined, even though I never imagined that we weren't in serious trouble, only this is a whole lot more seriouser. You know, given that Miss Quamacus is just about as powerful as any enemy that you could think of. Gil frowned at me, but Jenica gave him a little shake of her head. Jenica knew that you didn't need to be too logical when it came to summoning up spirits. It was your concentration that counted, your belief. Singing Rock, I know that you're probably going to be very reluctant to square up to Miss Quamacus again. He killed you, after all. But there has to be a way of beating him again, and I'm ready to take him on myself, but I really need some tips about how to do it. I carried on for over 15 minutes, begging and cajoling Singing Rock to help me. As time went by, I even began to lose my temper. All right then, don't help me. I don't give a rat's ass. I'm a white man. Leave me to fight your Indian demon all by myself. I don't need any help from you. Jenica reached across the table and held my hand. He is not coming tonight, is he? Never mind. Maybe we should get some sleep and think about what we are going to do. Yeah, come on, man, said Gil. Let's finish the bottle and crash out. Okay, I said. Maybe you're right. He's probably sick of trying to help me. We drained the last of the plum brandy. Gil told us some long and rambling story about trying to teach the Bosnians to play baseball and totally lost the thread. I helped him to bed, even though I was so drunk that I nearly fell into bed next to him. Jenica stayed up a little longer, but she was still recovering from the shock and strangeness of what had happened today, and she didn't say too much. Before she went to bed, however, she leaned over and kissed me on the forehead. I think I have to thank you. I think that creature would have killed me today, if not for you. You were very brave, I told her. I think that it would have killed all of us if you hadn't have said that ritual. Miss Quamacus is hiding inside Vasily Loop, and if Vasily Loop has to go back to his casket, then what is Miss Quamacus going to do? I don't know. I don't know anything at all about Native American magic. It's very strong. That's because it takes its power from the elements, from water and wind and earth and fire. Harry, I'm sorry that your spirit guide did not come to you. Well, me too. He's probably sulking, but don't worry, we'll think of something. Harry? I don't quite know what she wanted to say to me, but when people are stressed or frightened, they often say very emotional things that they don't really mean. In my experience, they do, anyhow. So all I did was squeeze her hand and say, "Sleep well, okay?" Chapter 19, Blood Pact. I opened my eyes. It was 3:47 in the morning, and the first hallucinatory light of dawn was beginning to lighten up the sky toward the east. I lifted my head from Razvan Dragomir's sandbag of a pillow, and Singing Rock was sitting in a chair in the opposite corner of the room. Singing Rock? Of course, little brother. You didn't really think that I would leave you to fight alone against Miss Quamacus, did you? I shuffled on my butt down to the end of the bed like a kid. Did you know it was Miss Quamacus, right from the beginning? No, he concealed himself very well. I only caught the smell of him when your friend recited her ritual, and the spirit in which he is hiding himself started to weaken. Vasily Loop, the vampire gatherer. A spirit, yes, and the spirit of a very strong man, a warrior, but only a man, and not a wonder worker like Miss Quamacus. It was so dark in the corner where Singing Rock was sitting that I couldn't see more than his outline, the shine from his glasses, and his combed-back hair, and the buffalo bone necklace that he always used to wear. I thought that I had gotten rid of Miss Quamacus for good, I told him. I thought that he was totally dispersed into the elements. You did, and he was. But one element is greater than all of the others, and that is fire. Fire can dry water and split rock, and fire can swallow the very air that men breathe. It was fire that brought Miss Quamacus back to life, fire that fused his soul back together again. Fire? What fire? A fire that killed many, but which had far greater consequences. A fire that burned at 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit and was intense enough to draw back together the separated parts of his being. You mean 9/11? The World Trade Towers? I have spoken to the souls of many who died that day. Each one of them remembers a great light and a great rush of wind and a word spoken in a language that they could not understand. Some of them believed that it was a last Islamic prayer as the terrorists offered themselves to Allah, but the word that they heard was Ma'itzo. Ma'itzo? What does that mean? It means wolf in Navajo. It was Miss Quamacus calling for the spirit of Vasily Loop to rise up so that he could possess him. After Miss Quamacus was dispersed to the elements, he no longer would have had any coherent spiritual substance of his own, so he could not have appeared in the world of men without Vasily Loop's spirit to wear, like a borrowed suit of clothes. I climbed off the bed and went to the window. The sky was growing lighter and lighter, and I imagined that all of the Strigoi who now infested Manhattan were slinking back to their coffins, or their mirrors, or wherever they were hiding during the day. You were going to warn me about Vasily Loop, I said. You warned me about the Strigoi, for sure, but you never got round to Loop. I did. But once your friend had told you about the Strigoi, you stopped looking for the signs. Don't you remember walking past the Hudson Street Grill? I smacked the back of my head. You're right, Hudson Street Grill, with only the I still lit up, and supper with only the up, L and up, Loop. Mind you, I probably wouldn't have realized what it meant. It is of no consequence now. You have discovered who your enemy really is, and you know that he is far more dangerous than Vasily Loop. But if Miss Quamacus can't appear in the real world without using Vasily Loop, we can seal Loop back in his casket, can't we? And then Miss Quamacus won't be able to get out. Miss Quamacus gives Vasily Loop's spirit a far greater resistance to your friend's rituals than he normally would have possessed. Vasily Lup has considerable strength of his own, but Misquamacus has also given him the influence of the great old ones. Your friend's ritual was able to weaken Vasily Lup, yes, to the point where Misquamacus had to reveal himself, but it was not enough to force him to return to his casket. So what can we do? You must follow Vasily Lup and find out where he is hiding during the hours of daylight. Even with your friend's ritual, you won't be able to send him back to his casket, because Misquamacus won't allow it. You will have to destroy him utterly, so that Misquamacus no longer has a spirit in which to hide himself. I see, but Vasily Lup hides in mirrors. How am I going to corner him without smashing every single mirror in the continental United States? I don't have any idea. I know Native American magic, but nothing of Svarkolaki. Well, you're a terrific help, not. I am always willing to give you my advice, little brother, but I cannot tell you what I do not know. I sat down on the end of the bed again. As the morning brightened, Singing Rock's image grew fainter and fainter, and now I could barely see him at all. I'm sorry, I said. I know there's no easy answer. There is one thing I can help you with. I can help you to fight against the Strigoi, and if the Strigoi are beaten, Vasily Lup will no longer have an army to protect him. I looked up. You can do that? How? Have you ever heard of Changing Woman? No, except that she sounds like every woman I ever tried to have a relationship with. The story of Changing Woman is the Navajo story of creation. In the time before time began, the world was ruled by the great old ones, who were the gods of chaos and destruction. Those were the gods that Misquamacus first called upon to destroy the white man, and which are still giving him strength. Singing Rock was talking in that deep, portentous voice he always used for telling Native American legends, but I was too tired to rib him, and besides, if he knew something that could help us to beat the Strigoi, I wanted to hear it. In those times, the world was terrorized by monsters that the Navajo used to call Bineyi, and it was a place of darkness and appalling violence. Almost all of the human race had been slaughtered, except for first man and first woman, along with their 2 young children. But first man and first woman were too old to bear any more children, and their children were related by blood. One day, however, a black cloud came down upon the mountain, Cho'uli'i, and there was a thunder and lightning around its peak. First man climbed the mountain and found a turquoise figurine. It was only the size of a small baby, yet it had the body of a fully grown woman. He took the figurine back to First Woman, and at first they were unsure of what to do with it, so First Woman suggested they take it back to the top of the mountain. Up on the mountain top in a storm, Nilchi, the wind, transferred the figurine into 2 living deities, Changing Woman and her sister, White Shell Woman. Changing Woman and White Shell Woman felt very strong attractions toward the elements, so one day Changing Woman lay naked on the mountainside with her thighs wide apart, and opened the lips of her vagina with her fingers so that the sun could shine its warmth directly inside her as it made its way across the sky. White Shell Woman did the same in a shallow stream, letting the water flow into her body. In 4 days, both women discovered that they were pregnant, and in 4 more days, they both delivered boys. White Shell Woman's son was named Water Child, and Changing Woman's son was named Monster Slayer. 4 days later, when he was already grown up, Changing Woman's son called on his father, the sun, to help him to exterminate the Beneyi. Like the Strigoi, the Beneyi could be fatally burned by sunlight, and when Changing Woman's son had picked up their scent and dug them out of their dark hiding places under the earth, he would shine his eyes on them and incinerate them into ashes. Changing Woman's son killed all of the Beneyi, and so the world became a safer place where humans could flourish once more. All his hundreds of children were born to be monster slayers too, so that the tribes would no longer be threatened by creatures from the time before time began. Monster slayers' children were called people with sun behind their eyes. Monster Slayer had the constancy of his father and the changeability of his mother, both different, yet in harmony, which is the way in which all Navajo men and women were encouraged to live. Changing Woman said, "You are male, and I am female. You are of sky, and I am of earth. You are constant in your brightness, but I must change with the seasons. You move constantly at the edge of heaven, while I must be fixed in one place. Remember, as different as we are, you and I, we are of one spirit. Unlike each other as we are, there can be no harmony in the universe as long as there is no harmony between us." Changing Woman rubbed skin from different parts of her body, and each time she did so, she created 2 adult males and 2 adult females, and these males and females created clans of their own, the Bit'ani, the within his cover people, the Tadichini, the bitter water clan, the Hashtuishni, the mud clan, and others. She took all of these people to the west, where they lived together in prosperity and peace. This was centuries ago, in the time when time had just begun. But Changing Woman is still alive today because she constantly rejuvenates herself with every season. As winter approaches, she becomes a grandmother, all curled up. But in spring, she hobbles on a cane of white shell and walks into a room to the east and grows stronger. Then she takes a cane of turquoise and walks into a room to the west and comes out a proud young woman. Finally, she walks into a north-facing room and returns as a young girl, so beautiful that people bow their heads in wonder. She is the cycle of human life. She goes forward with the seasons and the turning of the sun, yet she walks in the opposite direction, from old age to youth. Do you understand, little brother? Well, I said uneasily, it was a fascinating legend, even more entertaining than Adam and Eve and the serpent, but I couldn't see how it was going to help us to destroy the Strigoi. Singing Rock must have read my mind. He opened his left hand and held it out flat, and then his right hand. On one side, Harry Erskine, you have the demons of darkness and chaos who are trying to destroy you. On the other, you have the power of human life and fertility and light. You have to ask Changing Woman to help you. Only she can call on her son, the monster slayer, the people with sun behind their eyes, and only they can kill the Strigoi for you. Is that it? That's all I have to do? Talk to the mother of all human creation? Singing Rock nodded. What do I say? Like, "Dear Changing Woman, I'd really appreciate it if you could send your boys around to kick some Strigoi ass for me." Why do you always mock? Because I'm confused, that's why, and I'm scared shitless, and I don't think I've got what it takes to call on changing woman, or any other kinds of gods. Sure, I believe you believe in all of this Earth Mother stuff and monster slayers, and I believe it all exists in some reality, someplace. I've seen it, and I'm talking to you, aren't I? And by all the usual criteria, you don't even exist. But it's not my culture, is it? I don't have any affinity with it. I don't have any faith. It's like asking me to talk to Buddha. You don't need faith, Harry Erskine. Changing woman is real. You must have noticed that it grows cold in winter and the earth grows tired. Yet spring always returns, doesn't it? And the corn shoots up. Changing woman walks in the opposite direction, but you've turned around and seen her, haven't you? Even if it was only a glimpse, you've seen her in the fields, you've seen her in the city streets, you know she's there. For a fraction of a second, I think I understood what he was talking about. You know what it's like when you see a pretty young woman walking across the street and the sun momentarily lights up her face and she looks at you, and for some reason you feel that something important has happened, but you're not sure what. Singing Rock was saying that she really walks among us, the spirit of change, and that we've all seen her, even if we haven't realized it. All right, I said, maybe she is real. Maybe I've seen her. But I don't have the first idea how to talk to her, do I? Of course you do. Changing woman is always looking for harmony. She was deeply saddened when her people were driven from their lands, but she recognizes that all things must change and that there is brutality in the world as well as compassion. Out of death rises new life. Out of cruelty comes understanding. Changing woman grieves, yes, but she never seeks revenge, not like Miss Quamakas. If you are fighting for harmony, she will listen to you and help you. Okay, but how? What do I have to do? If you wish to speak to a spirit, where do you go? The window suddenly filled up with sunlight, and all I could see of Singing Rock was the glistening of his eyes. You don't mean... I asked him. You have very little time. You must hurry. Singing Rock. No, Harry Erskine. I have already given you more guidance than I should. The living cannot always rely on the dead, or else they are as good as dead themselves. But what if I need you again? There was no answer. Singing Rock was gone. I wanted to go alone, but Gil said it was going to be far too dangerous out on the streets, even in daylight. The Strigoi might be hiding away in their coffins and their mirrors, but the looters and the crazies would be out and about. And then Amelia came out of the bedroom in a floaty white linen cloud with white flowers embroidered on it. Harry, she said, and Gil, isn't it? You got it, ma'am. Did you get to see Razvan? Well, no, Razvan's in Bucharest right now, but we got to see his daughter, and she knows as much about Strigoi as he does. You said it out loud? What, Strigoi? Yes. According to Jenica, it doesn't matter too much, so long as they're not very close by, like right outside your window, or hiding under your bed, or provided they're not especially thirsty. You just have to be careful about mentioning their individual names. Well, this is a great relief, said Bertie, especially since I don't know any vampires by name. Don't make a joke of it, Bertie. You don't know how relieved I am to see that you're both okay. These Strigoi characters can get in almost anywhere. Not here. Nobody can get in here. My alarm system here is state of the art. I think you'd better sit down, I told him. You too, Amelia. As briefly as I could, I told them how we had discovered the coffins in the vaults under St. Stephen's Church. I also told them how Gil had come across Frank and brought him back to the Dragomir's apartment, and what Frank had told us about mirrors. I told her how the Strigoi had climbed in through the windows, and how Vasily Loop had appeared in the hallway. But Vasily Loop's spirit was brought to life by an even stronger spirit, a spirit named Misquamacus. Amelia stared at me in disbelief. Is this some kind of a joke? I wish it was. I saw him with my own eyes, Amelia. Living headdress, trophy cloak, everything. Amelia stood up and walked across to the window. On the sill stood a blue glass vase with 5 dead lilies in it, surrounded by fallen petals. She looked down at the street below, and there was a look on her face that I had never seen before, the look of a woman who has tried to escape the fate that has always been waiting for her, but failed. This is the same Miss Quamacus that you fought with earlier? Asked Bertie. There's only one Miss Quamacus, I'm afraid. Amelia turned around. I suppose you've talked to Singing Rock. First thing I did. And Singing Rock said, I told her all about Changing Woman and her son, the Monster Slayer, and the people with sun behind their eyes. Amelia listened patiently, but then she said, Why can't he communicate with her? Singing Rock. He's far better qualified than I am. He's a Native American, after all, and he's a medicine man, too. I know, but Singing Rock has 2 serious problems. One, he's a Sioux, and I don't think that the Navajo and the Sioux are exactly bosom buddies. 2, he's a man, and Changing Woman doesn't answer to men. This is making me insane, said Bertie. Better insane than exsanguinated, I told him. Harry, said Amelia, I don't think I can do this. I've read quite a lot about Changing Woman, and she isn't like the spirit of somebody's Aunt Mildred. She's a deity. I know, but from what Singing Rock told me, she's a very sympathetic deity, as deities go, and she's very much in favor of life, as opposed to having your throat cut and bleeding all over the rug. It was then that Bertie stood up and went over to Amelia and took both of her hands in his. Amelia, he said, you should do this. Bertie? I asked. I didn't think you believed in any of this mumbo-jumbo. Bertie spoke with surprising dignity. Just now, what I believe in is not very important. You only have to look out of the window to see that the city is dying and that the authorities have abandoned us. If nobody is coming to help us, we must help ourselves, and if this is the only way that has been suggested to us, well, we must try it. Amelia said, I don't know, Bertle. I really don't think that my psychic power is strong enough. How do you know, Amelia, unless you try? This Misky Marcus, you fought him before, didn't you? And you sent him packing? If you did it once, you could do it again. Amelia looked across at me, but all I could do was shrug. It's your choice, sweetheart. So it was that we sat around the glass dining room table underneath a Scandinavian chandelier that was made out of dozens of triangles of blue and white frosted glass. It was almost midday, and the humidity was so high that we were all dripping. Bertie started to fan himself with a table mat so that the chandelier tinkled, but Amelia said, No, darling, you mustn't disturb the air. So I should melt? Asked Bertie irritably. Think about an ice-cold Coke, I suggested. Amelia reached out and we all held hands. She closed her eyes for a while and then she said, I am calling on any spirit who can help me. It always made my scalp prickle when she said that. She had an echoey quality in her voice, like she wasn't here at all, but standing in another room. No matter how many times I talked to Seeking Rock or tried to summon up other spirits, I could never make my voice sound like that. I am calling on any spirit who can guide me to Changing Woman. I am calling on any spirit who can touch her shoulder and ask her to speak to me. We waited in silence, with our hands growing sweatier and sweatier. I could feel a drop of perspiration roll off the end of my nose and fall onto the table, and I could feel another one building up to follow it, but there was nothing I could do to stop it. The link between us could not be broken. I am asking to be taken to Changing Woman, to pay my respects to her, and to beg her for a favor, in the names of those who gave her life, Sa'a Naghai and Bikeh Hezi. I had to hand it to Amelia. She always knew her stuff. She had said offhandedly that she had read quite a lot about Changing Woman, but knowing her, that probably meant that she had graduated summa cum laude in Navajo mysticism. Changing Woman, I honor you. Changing Woman, I give you my respect. Changing Woman, I implore you to speak to me. By the expression on his sweaty, deep red face, I could tell that Bertie was beginning to grow increasingly uncomfortable, but it was obvious that he respected Amelia's talents, even though he found it so hard to believe in spirits, and especially vampires. I might have thought he was an asshole when I first met him, but that was only because I was jealous. I could tell that he loved her, damn it. Changing Woman, speak to me. I need your life, and I need your strength and your wisdom. I need you to bring me the power of the sun, so that darkness is banished from our city. I need you to bring me your son, Monster Slayer, and your son's sons, and your son's daughters, too. Man, I felt like sneezing. I wrinkled and distorted my face, but the itch in my nose grew stronger and stronger until I felt like I had to pull my hand away from Gil's, or I was going to let out a blast that would hit Bertie right in the face. But then I saw a shudder in the air right behind Amelia's chair, and the urge to sneeze was completely dispelled. It looked as if the air was actually wrinkling, like the heat from a metal rooftop on a very hot day. Right in front of my eyes, an old woman appeared, transparent at first, but then more and more visible. She was tiny and hunched, with braided white hair and a face so desiccated that she looked like a monkey rather than a human. She was wearing a pale gray woolen cloak, and in one hand she was holding a thin stick which was shiny turquoise blue. Amelia kept her eyes closed and continued to call on the spirits to help her. I didn't know if I should say something like, "Look behind you," but I was pretty sure that she must be aware that Changing Woman had actually appeared. I had learned from previous experience not to break the spell in the middle of a seance. It could ruin everything, and it could be dangerous, too. Changing Woman, I need your courage. Changing Woman, I need your warmth. Changing Woman, I need your benevolence. Now the air behind Bertie's chair began to shimmer, too. Within a few seconds, another woman had appeared, a handsome woman in her mid-40s or thereabouts. She was wearing a headdress of brown leaves and a coarse brown blanket, and her cheeks were marked with red paint. She was standing right opposite me, staring at me over the top of Bertie's head, and her eyes were dead black, as if the inside of her skull was empty. Gil had opened his eyes, and he gripped my hand tighter to indicate that he had seen these two women too. "Don't say anything," I murmured silently, using my lips to speak the words. At that moment, however, he gripped my hand again and jerked his head upward. "Behind you," he said without moving his lips. "What?" I mouthed. He jerked his head again, and I suddenly realized that another spirit must have manifested itself right behind me. I very slowly turned my head, and out of the corner of my eye I saw a young woman dressed in fluorescent white with maroon zigzag patterns on her clothes. I couldn't turn around far enough to see her face, but if Gil's expression was anything to go by, it was just as hair-raising as the woman who was standing behind Bertie. "Changing woman, hear me. Come to me from all the four corners of the world, from the east, where the sun rises and everything is born, from the south, where everything grows and ripens, from the west, where the sun sinks in fullness and satisfaction, from the north, where everything dies." Now, behind Gil's chair, there was another tremble of disturbed air. It flowed for a moment like clear water running over rocks, and then it gradually took on the shape of a young woman, completely naked except for red and white beads around her wrists and ankles, and complicated patterns of terracotta paint on her skin. Her silvery black hair flowed over her shoulders and halfway down her back. Gil was sitting on the north side of the table, and when this young woman appeared, I knew that Amelia had succeeded in calling up Changing Woman. Hadn't Singing Rock told me that Changing Woman always walks in the opposite direction? From the north, which usually symbolizes coldness and death, the loveliest of young women had appeared, bringing the hope of fertility and new life. Amelia slowly opened her eyes. "You're here," she said, and she couldn't stop herself from smiling. "You called me," said four voices at once. There was so much psychic charge in the room that it crackled with static electricity. When Changing Woman spoke, blue sparks crept around the edge of the dining table, and all of our hair stood up on end. A caterpillar of electricity even crawled around Gil's dog tags and up the silver chain that hung around his neck. "We need your help, Changing Woman," said Amelia. "Miss Quimacus, the wonder worker, has returned in the cloak of a borrowed spirit. He has raised a tribe of undead people from a far-off place beyond the Eastern Ocean. They have already slaughtered many thousands, and their evil will spread all across the country unless we can destroy them." "I know of this thing," said Changing Woman. I could hardly tolerate the sound of her voice because it made my teeth buzz and my skin feel as if fire ants were crawling all over me. "Then you will help us?" asked Amelia. "We need monster slayers who can discover where these undead people are hiding and can burn them with the sunlight that shines from their eyes." "You are speaking of my son's clan." "We don't know anybody else who has the power to help us." The four women slowly walked around the table until the young woman was standing behind me and the old woman was facing me from behind Bertie's back. Gil was staring at me apprehensively, but there was nothing I could do to reassure him except shrug. You know what Miss Quimacus intends to do? Yes, said Amelia. He wants to rid this country of all but Native Americans. Can you think of any reason why I should stand in his way? Tens of thousands of my people died at the hands of the white man, or because of his greed, and strangers of many different beliefs now walk across the sacred places where our hogans once stood. I know that our people did you some terrible wrongs, said Amelia. All I can do is appeal to your humanity. The four women changed positions again. As they did so, I glanced quickly at each of them, trying to judge from their expressions whether Changing Woman was going to help us or not. But each one of them was impassive and unreadable, especially the old woman, whose wizened face was barely human at all. I am the daughter of Sa'anahagi and Bikahizah, said Changing Woman. Sa'anahagi is the way that all living things achieve immortality through reproduction. Bikahizah is the peace and harmony which is essential to the perpetuation of life. Because I am the daughter of Sa'anahagi and Bikahizah, I will help you to be rid of the undead tribe. I had never heard words that bucked up my spirits so much, so to speak. Amelia smiled and said, Thank you, Changing Woman, and bless you. And even Bertie couldn't stop grinning. Gil said, Now we can kick some ass. The atmosphere in the dining room was now so charged up with static that sparks were jumping between the chairs, and the glass triangles that hung from the chandelier were tinkling and clinking like wind chimes. The young girl walked around the table to the place where the young woman in the shining white cloak was standing. They stood side by side for a moment, and then somehow the two of them overlapped and melted together so that only the young girl was left. She walked around the table again, and this time she melted into the middle-aged woman. It is the law of nature that everything must grow old and die, said the old woman and the young girl, speaking in unison. Everything must be reborn. There is no place in this world for those who are dead, but not dead. With that, the young girl melted into the old woman, so that she was left standing alone, naked, incredibly beautiful, her hair rising from her shoulders as if it were being blown by an unfelt wind. I call on my son and my son's children. I call on the clan of the people with sun behind their eyes. I call on them to seek out the undead tribe and annihilate them all. She started to chant, a high-pitched, repetitive incantation that went on and on for nearly 5 minutes. As she did so, she began to fade, the same way that Singing Rock faded, until all I could see were the faint, dancing filaments of her wind-blown hair. Gil let go of my hand and stood up. Amelia immediately shouted, "No, Gil, not yet!" There was a crack like a giant tree breaking in half, and then a flash of light that almost blinded me. The chandelier exploded, showering us all in glass, and then the glass-topped table shattered too. Paintings dropped from the walls, and Bertie's spindly sculpture was sent flying across the living room. One after the other, all the windows in the apartment were blown in, and the noise was so deafening that we couldn't hear each other shout. Underneath all of this crackling and splintering, I heard another noise. It was so deep and vibrant that I felt it rather than heard it. It was like a huge electrical generator or 1,000 voices humming basso profondo. "What's happening?" said Bertie. "I thought they were going to help us." "Please, Bertle, just wait." He didn't have to wait long. The humming grew louder and louder, and all of the debris in the apartment was drawn toward the middle of the living room. Fragments of glass, broken furniture, pieces of sculpture, pebbles and compost from overturned plant pots, magazines, letters, and dead flowers. They rose up, all of these bits and pieces, glittering and tumbling in the air, and behind them I could see a dark figure forming, like a man made out of smoke. He was huge, nearly 7 feet tall, and he actually smelled like smoke, like grass fires burning on a hot summer day. He was insubstantial. After all, he was a spirit rather than a real man, but he was using the debris to define his outline so that we could see him better. Out of the turmoil of shattered glass, his head gradually formed. He looked as if he were wearing a headdress made out of buffalo horns, which gave him a very satanic appearance. But this magic had nothing to do with Satan, or with God, for that matter. This was Monster Slayer of the Navajo, whose mother was Changing Woman, and whose father was the sun itself. "My mother has asked me to help you," he rumbled, and his voice sounded like a fire blazing up a chimney. "She tells me that you wish me to seek out the tribe of the undead and burn them." "We honor you, Monster Slayer," said Amelia. Monster Slayer raised both hands and said, "That which my mother asks of me, I will always do." "Just be careful, sir," said Gil with unexpected bravado. "The undead tribe, they're not stupid, and there's hundreds of them, and they can move as quick as a lizard off a hot brick." Monster Slayer turned his huge, smoky head, and then abruptly opened his eyes. Out of each eye socket burst a dazzling ray of light, so intense that I had to turn my face away. The twin rays of light hit the wall, and with a sharp detonation, they burned right through the paint, right through the plasterboard, and into the kitchen. The whole apartment was filled with smoke. Monster Slayer closed his eyes, and it seemed like everything went suddenly dark, except for the lime green after images swimming in front of me. As my sight gradually came back to me, I saw Monster Slayer take a step away from us, and then another. With each step, all of the debris that he had used to form his material shape made a noise like somebody shoveling gravel. Shoosh, shoosh, shoosh. Gil, still rubbing his eyes, looked at the hole in the wall. "Oh my God," he said, "this character sure doesn't need any hints on unarmed combat, does he?" Monster Slayer stepped back, and then the smoke that had made up his body swirled away, and the debris clattered and shifted to the floor. When he was gone, Amelia raised both arms and closed her eyes. "I bless your name, son of Changing Woman," she said in a high sing-song voice. "May the great Manitou lend you all the trickery you need." "Amen to that," said Gil. Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I hope you'll join us next Saturday morning for another installment of Manitou Blood. And until then, have a great week, everyone.